Good Shabbos. Who's seen the series Somebody Feed Phil? Yeah? Any fans? I like it. Phil is, he was the creator of Everybody Loves Raymond. He's a comedian, good New York Jewish boy. And the show is a food show. He travels around the world finding delicious food. And it follows him in all of his goofiness, enjoying the delicacies of the world. But I can't help but be jealous because I know if I would be able to go to those same places, I would go through them, but the foods of those places wouldn't necessarily go through me. He really engages in the culture of these places because he's able to partake of the local culture and food, and most of it is treif. Most of it is not kosher. I've kept kosher to varying degrees my entire life, but that doesn't mean it's always been easy or I've always liked it. There was actually one moment on the cusp of my rabbinic ordination when I tried to convince my classmates that we should have a treif fest. One first, last hurrah before devoting our lives to rabbinic leadership. Now, some of my classmates who didn't grow up religious or observant of kashrut, they assured me, Ari, it's not worth it. I'm not missing all that much. But I wanted to have my Jewish Rumspringa. Try everything once before choosing to keep kosher. Spoiler alert, we didn't do it. It turns out that rabbis are a big bunch of chickens. So I have never had shrimp or lobster. I've never had a cheeseburger, at least not one with real meat and real cheese. I've never had chicken parmesan or bacon, although I am thoroughly convinced that I would enjoy all of them. I'm not one of those Jews who hears about treif and says, ick, I don't have a revulsion to these foods. I actually have a temptation for them. If you've tasted these foods, keep it to yourself, okay? You don't have to tell me what I'm missing or what I'm not missing. It's fine. It's really fine. I have made my choices and I'm okay with them. I really am. Or maybe this sermon is protesting too much and I'm not okay with them. But I truly believe on some fundamental level, although I need to remind myself of it, that keeping kosher is one way I demonstrate my love of God on a very personal level. It's a daily, or 3 times daily, or more than that if you include snacks. It's a daily way to connect to God through my gut. What is it they say? The way to a person's heart is through their stomach. Maybe that's what kashrut is for me, and perhaps that's what it can be for all of us, but it isn't always easy. I've struggled with its meaning in my life and the restrictions, the limitations it's placed on me. As I mentioned earlier, Parshat Shmini contains the laws of pure and impure animals, which is the basis for kashrut today, the Jewish dietary practices. And I took this opportunity as we reach Parshat Shmini to reflect on my 40 years of kashrut observance and its meaning. And I want to offer you today my abridged kosher autobiography. That doesn't mean that this is like the kosher version of my autobiography. It means it's the autobiography of my life told through kosher experiences. And it's severely abridged. I could go on for a really long time. But I also want to ask you to consider yourself. What are those significant moments in your own life? If you were to write your own kosher autobiography, what would it sound like? What are the significant moments where you made a choice one way or the other? And where did it take you? And what did it mean to you? Okay, so hold that in mind as you're listening to my reflections. And thanks for letting me get some therapy through you. Neither of my parents grew up in kosher homes. They each came to embrace kashrut as part of their teenage rebellion from their parents. Their parents wanted to Americanize and assimilate, and my parents, baby boomers as they are, wanted to be Jewish. It was cool to be Jewish for them. And so they adopted kashrut and dragged their families along with them, and I was the beneficiary. I grew up in a kosher home. We only brought hechshered, that is certified kosher products, into our home. We had separate dishes for milk and meat, separate sponges. Yellow was always for the meat, and blue was always for the dairy. We waited 3 hours according to the German custom, which has become the dominant practice of the conservative movement after eating meat before having dairy. So there were always some Stella d'Oro cookies around for a par of sweet treat after a meat meal. And we ate a lot more meat in my home growing up than we eat today in my own home as an adult. So meat was usually on the menu most nights for dinner. I suppose a significant early moment in my evolving consciousness around kashrut was my 8th birthday party. We had the party in our Jewish day school in the auditorium. We just rented out that space for my party and invited all my classmates. And my parents had hired a magician to do some tricks and entertain us. And for his grand finale, the magician magically made a birthday cake appear. And it said, "Happy birthday, Ari," written on it. But it wasn't from a kosher bakery. And so after a brief huddle of the adults in the room, the decision was made that we couldn't eat it. It was an awkward moment. Luckily, my parents had backup cookies. But some of my earliest associations with kashrut were about denial. You can't partake. This isn't for you. Now, that's an important lesson for a child and even for an adult to learn, that delayed gratification, that you give something up for the sake of something else. But it's hard for an 8-year-old to learn, especially at his own birthday party. So as I said, thank you for this therapy session for me. It's nice to get this off my chest. Here's another snapshot. When I was young, we were privileged to be able to welcome a Jewish dignitary to our home. He was going to give a lecture at our shul, and my family hosted him for dinner before the event. He was a well-respected, well-known Orthodox rabbi in the Jewish world, someone I admired. I'd heard his name growing up, and he was someone who I looked up to. And as I mentioned, we kept a kosher home. We even kept stricter standards in our home than my family otherwise might have observed based on our own understanding of kashrut laws. But we did so in order to accommodate Orthodox family members and friends who we wanted them to feel comfortable in our home. That was important to us as an expression of welcoming of guests. And unfortunately, that's not how it played out in this instance. At dinner, the rabbi sat at our table, but he had also brought his own paper plate and prepared food that he ate alongside the meal my parents had prepared. Now, I suppose if I'm being generous, I could say that this rabbi was observing his convictions, living his life in accordance with the way he understood Jewish law, and he was trying in some way to accept our offer of hospitality within the limits of what he deemed appropriate for his religious observance. We all have red lines of what we will and won't do. And I'm certain that I have some red lines that would make me a less gracious guest, but I still, nonetheless, wouldn't be willing to cross even if I were in another person's home. But I had a hard time understanding the choice he made and the fact that he didn't communicate about that in advance. I still do now. I still find that very hurtful, what that rabbi did. The next scene is from a pilgrimage site. Okay? This is a childhood pilgrimage site. I think some of you can relate. It was the kosher hot dog stand at Shea Stadium. I'm not talking about Citi Field. Nowadays, they have several kosher locations sprinkled throughout the park. Back in the old Shea Stadium, the kosher hot dog stand was way up the first base line, but it was in the seats that you had to have the expensive tickets to get into. And so you had to show your ticket to get there, unless you told the security guard, "I'm not sitting here, but I'm just going to the kosher hot dog stand." So we as kids used to do both. We used to use the kosher hot dog stand both to get a kosher hot dog, but also to sneak into the good seats. Because once you're in, you can go take the nicer seats. We didn't do that. I was too chicken again. But I'll never forget, I went down there, and the security guard, who I'm presuming was not Jewish, he says, "Can I see your ticket?" And we said, no, we're just going to the kosher hot dog stand. And he goes, "Oh yeah? What's yontif?" He was giving us a Jewish IQ quiz, a basic trivia quiz. to test whether or not we were really going to get the kosher hot dogs. And we got a kick out of that. But when I reflect on that experience, I realize it was symbolic about certain cultural fault lines. What's more American than baseball? And what's a more authentic baseball experience than having a hot dog at the park? When you're wearing your baseball cap, your kippah is hidden underneath, and the people sitting next to you might not even realize that your hot dog isn't the same as their hot dog. It was a way to fully participate in this American ritual without compromising my religious beliefs. Which brings me to the final episode in my kosher autobiography, at least for today. As I said, I could go on, but I won't. And it has to do with the kosher dining hall in my college. Now, every college does this differently. Some colleges don't have kosher food available. Other colleges, you have to go to the Hillel or a Jewish space in order to get kosher food. But some have a specific dining hall where kosher food is available. Something that I loved about the college I went to was that there was a room off of the main dining hall where most of the students ate their meals that was the kosher room. And so if you were a student who kept kosher, you could go into the kosher room, grab your kosher meal, take it on a tray, go out and sit with the general population and eat your kosher meal alongside them. Sort of similar to the baseball stadium hot dog. That was really important to me, although I don't think I would have said it at the time. Now, I didn't always partake of the kosher food. I often would eat vegetarian food from the main dining hall offerings. But when I wanted kosher food, the idea that I could go get it and still eat in mixed company, that was really significant for me. I know for some Jewish parents, they want their children to have strong Jewish experiences in college. They want them to make social connections with other Jews. That was important to me too. But I also went to college hoping to meet diverse peoples from all over the world and from all over this country. And I think if I would have had to segregate myself socially from people in order to get kosher food, well, that would have impoverished my college experience. To reference the first story I told, I want to have my cake and eat it too. Some of my most important friendships that nourish me until this day were forged over shared meals in that main dining hall. And I would have missed out on those very important relationships if I only ate with the kosher kids, although I love them very much as well. My life is richer because I know these people, and I broke bread with them, and I continue to break bread with them. So here's a text I want to teach you. There's a debate in the Talmud in Masechet Avodah Zarah about whether or not a Jew can eat food that has been prepared by a non-Jew. Actually, in Avodah Zarah, it's prepared by an idolater. And the question of how broadly or how narrowly one interprets that category is significant. Are all non-Jews under the category there, or is it specifically idolaters? Okay? So hold that question aside for a second, but the debate is whether or not someone can eat food that has been prepared by an idolater. And for some Jews, it's very important that food that is prepared has to be prepared by a Jew. And the reason for this prohibition is the source of debate by medieval commentators on the Talmud. Rashi and Tosafot disagree on this point. Rashi says the concern of eating food that was prepared by an idolater is if you accustom yourself to the food of idolaters, or their style of food, or perhaps they're not knowledgeable enough about the laws of kashrut, you might come accidentally to eat something that is forbidden to you. That's why Rashi says it's prohibited. It's because you might eat something treif as a result of eating food that has been prepared by non-Jews. The Tosafot disagree. They say the concern is not about eating something treif. It's actually about what happens around the table. They say if you eat with people who are not Jewish, well then you might lead to mixed dancing. They actually say explicitly mishum chatnut, that we don't want to marry them. And therefore, if we create a sort of barrier of we won't eat food prepared for you, this is a way to socially engineer a Jewish community, to say we're going to keep our lives separate. So this debate persists. Is the concern about eating this food because we don't want to eat something treif, or is it because we don't want mixing? Not of milk and meat, that is, but of people. I think most of you are probably like me in that you side with Rashi over Tosafot. Your concern is more about the kashrut laws in particular, is more about not ingesting something that is forbidden to Jews, and less about social mixing. And there are some Jews who follow the Tosafot, who put up high walls and isolate themselves from other religious groups. And increasingly, those Jewish groups are isolating themselves from other Jewish groups. If you just need to go on an El Al flight to realize what I'm talking about. You know, El Al food is kosher. It's kosher, the food on El Al. But there's like 3 levels of service that come out because every Jewish group has now its own certification that they don't accept the kashrut of the others. So there's increasing divisions even within the Jewish people, let alone with Jews and non-Jews. All I can share is, again, from my own experience, that my life has been enriched by eating at lots of different tables with lots of different types of people, and I've been able to remain committed, I think, to my Jewish identity. I think I'm pretty secure in my Jewish identity, as well as my kashrut practice. Even in those spaces. It might be playing with fire, but I'm willing to take that risk. Keeping kosher in mixed company has also, I would go further, been an exercise in creativity, in communication, and flexibility. When we engage in mixed company, and I see you nodding because I assume you've had experiences like me, finding the ways to advocate for what we need or what our red lines are, it requires us to communicate openly with other people. It requires us to be flexible. And I think it requires us to get a little bit creative at times about the menu, about things that are important. So for me, kashrut is not and should not be, in my opinion, about social engineering or control. It's not about putting up walls between our community and other communities. It's not, I would also argue, although I know many people find this very compelling, it's not about hygiene. I know plenty of people who keep kosher and eat terribly unhealthy diets. For me, what is kashrut about? Kashrut's about love. It's about love of Jewish identity. It's our love language with God. In the same way that we adjust our diet when we get married to accommodate the needs of our partner or spouse, the brands that they find necessary to keep in the house. That's a loving act to compromise about what we keep in the fridge or in the pantry. The same way that when we have children who won't eat the food we prepare, and we try to figure out ways to feed them, for God's sake, that's a loving act of adjusting our diet to the particular idiosyncrasies and needs of the people we love. And if somebody has an allergy and we welcome them into our home and we find ways to accommodate and adjust and figure out a creative menu and communicate, well, is it okay if the peanuts are in the house but not on the table? That's another loving act of inclusion and respect. So for me, kashrut is about our love of God. If we want to have a loving relationship with the God of Israel, who for some reason doesn't want me to have crab, well, then the menu has to reflect that. When I'm in Israel, I enjoy hummus and shakshuka. That's my love language of Israel. When I'm in New Jersey, I love a good bagel or a slice of pizza. That's my New Jersey love language. And when I want to honor my Eastern European ancestry and feel connected to them, well, gefilte fish is certainly on the menu. It's not so delicious. It's certainly an acquired taste. But because I love my people, I have come to love gefilte fish. But wherever I go, God is with me, and the laws of kashrut are that expression of love of God with every delicious bite. Shabbat Shalom. Chatzi Kaddish, page 368, please rise.